Hello and welcome to this roundtable celebrating the 40th anniversary of the ISIN standard. My name is Uwe Meyer. I'm taking care of the Secretariat for ANA and being the Executive Secretary. And I'm joined today by the former ANA board members, Mr. Fred Delamain, Mr. Niels Horgor, and Mr. Jim Taylor. Mr. Delamain, formerly working for the Amsterdam Stock Exchange, was the first chairman of ANA. Mr. Niels Horgor, working for VP Denmark, was the second chairman of ANA, and Mr. Jim Taylor, formerly working for QSIP Global Services, was serving on the ANA board as technical director. Gentlemen, I'm very pleased to have you here on board and to see you again. And let's jump right into our first question. So the first question would be, what can you remember from the time that ISIN was created? Let's start with Fred.
Well, thank you for the invite to start with. I actually got involved with ISIN when I became managing director of the Securities Clearing Corporation of the Amsterdam Stock Exchange. This was at the end of the 80s. In that period, security specialists came together regularly in the so-called ISIN working group. They discussed all sorts of practicalities regarding the ISIN number and its uses. This was initially a rather small group, but as the interest for ISIN grew, so did the number of participants. There were exchanges, clearing corporations, central banks, and also data vendors were well represented.
Thank you, Fred. Next one would be Niels.
Yeah, my background is more or less the same as Fred's. I was in those days head of our customer support at the VP Danish Securities Center, and also at the end of the 80s, ISIN, the word was a mystery for me. But I attended a meeting in where you also were, Fred, and your predecessor, Mr. Jim Butler or something, Jim, was also there, and I immediately got hooked on the idea, and it was a very giving group, and we met at several occasions until we were split up in the autumn of '91, where you, Fred, took over. You were hosting a meeting in Amsterdam. I remember it specifically because you stood up and actually fathered Anna that day.
Okay, thank you very much, Niels. And last but not least, Jim, what do you remember from the times when ISIN was created?
Well, my recollection was that we had all the efforts of the national members trying to create some type of framework that would allow countries and market makers to talk in between each other. And that was the formation of the ISIN expert group. We remember working and trying to develop a framework for the basic ISIN number and subsequently the basic data, and trying to get everybody's opinions together. So we finally agreed and developed guidelines, and subsequently the evolution of the ISIN standard just continues to grow every day.
Thank you, Jim. So let's move directly to the second question and start now with Jim. How were you involved in the creation of the ISIN?
Well, in the beginning, we had as representing the United States, we had to ensure the ease of the market's use of the ISIN standard and the transition that had to take place between the current systems, the national systems that occur, and some of the vendor systems that occur. So we had to work towards a gradual implementation to the standard, and working to that implementation in the global markets. It just took time, education, and the transition worked out very well, as you can tell today.
Thank you. Niels, what is your recollection how you were involved in the creation of the ISIN?
I was not directly involved in the creation of the global ISIN as such, because the standard was there before I joined the ISIN expert group. But immediately after having learned about ISIN, I was hooked on the idea and could see all the possibilities and all the options such an identifier could create for us. And therefore, I took the idea with me back home from La Ulp and managed to persuade my CEO that ISIN was the way forward we should also go. It took a couple of years before we had it fully implemented in Denmark, but from then off we didn't look back. We have, of course, still the domestic code like the QSIP code or the CEDAW or whatever, but the ISIN is the predominant code being used. And I'm glad to see that it's not only in Denmark, but it's actually more or less all over the world.
Thank you. Finally, Fred, so you were there from the very beginning. So what is your recollection how you were involved in the creation of the ISIN?
Yes, well, when I got involved, the ISIN was already established, but it was certainly not widely used. So I think I believed I had two roles. One was to promote ISIN in the domestic market, and secondly, to participate in the discussions within the ISIN working group and in the technical committee of the International Standardization Organization, ISO. My main objective was to bring the message to all markets that they should be using the ISIN code, certainly for international transactions.
You probably both of you recall the days when we met as ISIN expert. Each of us brought piles of paper with doublets and missing codes and mistakes, and nobody really knew how to do things. And there was a lot of discussion amongst us. Therefore, it was really good that we maintained the ISIN group and by that established ANA, because it gave us a background and some guidelines to work on to establish that we managed to implement the ISIN all over, along with other codes, of course.
Yeah, okay, great. Thank you so much. So more or less to wrap up a little bit with the last question, why do you think the ISIN is such an important standard? And also to give a little bit an outlook, why do you think ANA has been so successful? Fred, to start with you.
Well, with ISIN, securities traders could execute transactions. In the beginning of the usage of ISIN, especially international transactions that could be processed in clearing and settlement procedures and systems. With that respect, ISIN was a necessity for the development of the capital markets, locally and internationally. Presently, ISIN, as a securities identifier, is so dominant that one can hardly imagine that there was a time that it did not exist. ANA has been successful due to a few reasons. First, the members of ANA all have the same objective. And although there are differences, they are lookalikes. And among lookalikes, one can more easily do business and develop products. Secondly, ANA had and still has focus. The predominant focus is to serve the securities industry. Thirdly, the members of ANA are modest. It is not a highbrow marketing environment. ANA has created an environment and procedures to get things done and to get it done thoroughly and properly. This attitude has helped ANA to establish credibility from ISO and from the capital markets participants throughout the world. And therefore, ANA was also trusted with other identification standards, the CFI, the MIC, and lately the LEI.
Thank you, Fred. Niels, what is your opinion on the importance of the ISIN, the reasons for that, and why is ANA so successful still?
Yes, I completely agree with Fred in his analysis on why ISIN has been so successful. We can be proud of what we have been doing in ANA because we were pushing the world in the right direction, but we more or less must admit that it was low-hanging fruit, that it was easy to persuade people to see that there was a need for a global identifier, because in those days, early 90s, the international trade with securities was growing hugely. And therefore, there was a need for doing something, do things better than we have been doing so far. Why ANA has been successful and been allowed to create and maintain other standards as well is mainly because that we have a common interest in it, and we have a common will, which is expressed at numerous meetings, general meetings all over the world, where the interest has been so huge and everybody has been eager to show that they were interested in what we were doing and they were willing to participate. And with that eagerness, it was more or less like urgent. It was easy to persuade customers. If you have that feeling with you that it is such a good thing, nobody can really deny reject you. So I think it was we have been doing a good job, and I'm sure that Anna in the future will be doing an even better job, because I know that you have reorganized many things, and you are having staff and so on, which we didn't have in the early days. We were more or less happily amateurs, trying to do whatever was needed and doing it in our best way.
Thank you, Niels. And finally, over to you, Jim, for famous last words.
Thank you, Uwe.
You're welcome.
Well, I think it had a lot to do with our sustained commitment to standards. I mean, Anna was a forum of market experts that formed the association, where we were able to continually try to listen to the national markets and adopt with consensus changes to new instruments and market practices, whether the national numbering agency was large or small. So that, I think, helped us acquire credibility. And also the markets were looking for a way to become more efficient, reduce settlement and clearing time, and reduce risk. And they saw the experts working together, and everybody had their views from the different national markets, but ISIN became a very important standard that showed that the security industry could work together. And that's what's been going on from the day I left and continues today.
I think that was a great, good word at the end. Jim, thank you for that. And thank you, gentlemen, for joining our roundtable. Has been a real pleasure also for me to dive deep into the history of Anna. And thank you again for joining us, and wishing you all the best for the future, and hope to see you soon somewhere, hopefully live. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Uwe.
Stay well, be good.
Thank you. Thank you. Goodbye to all.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.